So welcome to Theatre There and Here, which is a discussion about, broadly speaking, to where we're going to uncover the difference between theatre making here in the USA and also in our home countries, which are, of course, the UK, Greece, the Philippines, and for me, Australia, which is a pretty broad range, but of course it won't encompass everything. And even then, I can't claim to be a representative of the whole theatrical culture of Australia, and nor could any of us, I think, for any of our home countries. So we'll be limited by our own experiences, but also we'll have the specifics and the joy of our own experiences to share with everyone. I'm very excited to have you all here. Quickly about me, my name is Andrew Strano. I use the pronouns they, them. I am a theatre maker who grew up in Wagga Wagga, Australia, a little tiny town, about halfway between Melbourne and Sydney, known mostly for being about halfway between Melbourne and Sydney. And now I'm here in the United States. I'm here in New York City. It's a vast difference for me. I came over here on a Fulbright scholarship to study at the Graduate Musical Theatre Writing Program at NYU. And this week have a workshop performance debuting as a part of the Global Forms Theatre Festival, of which you should check out everything if you're a viewer at home. There's a lot of wonderful things going on with incredibly talented immigrant artists all through the following week, all through the rest of this week. And there's been things going on, of course, already. And if you're here, it means you probably know about it. So we've got our show, a musical I've written with a Japanese composer, Yuriko Shibata, debuting. It's called Skin. We're completely thrilled about the ability we've had to workshop it. And a lot of that will inform even my opinions today in this discussion. I'm going to throw this over to Ioanna Katsarou, who's from Greece, and she'll introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Ioanna, I'm from Greece, and I'm an actor, director, and theater educator. I'm a co-founder and artistic and co-artistic director of Eclipses Group Theatre in New York, which is a non-profit group company that serves as a cultural bridge between US and Greece. I'm also a member of the Lincoln Center Directors Lab program, and I'm also co-founder, and I was co-founder and artistic and leading member of Aktisa Eliou Art Theatre in Greece, which won the award as the best regional theatre from the Greek Critics Association in 2006, and we were nominated also in 2003. And also currently, the last 3 years, I'm collaborating with the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and I direct there the second year students.
Stunning. Yeah, I do a lot of teaching myself. I have always done that, and it's so linked with our practice, right? It's that thing of practice informs teaching, informs practice, informs teaching. So wonderful. I'm going to pass over to Russell Legaspi from the Philippines, who will speak to us about his background.
Hi, I'm Russell Legaspi from Manila, Philippines, full-time actor and writer, pretty much just acting, TV, film, theater, and some commercials back in Manila. And I've had some very little experience here in New York, mostly back in Manila.
Amazing. Completely wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, giving us your time today. And Joe Staten. Joe from the UK.
Hi, my name is Joe Staten. I'm originally from Somerset in the UK, but I actually grew up, my childhood was mainly spent in France and Spain.
Amazing.
France, 8 years in Spain. I now live in New York. I'm on my O1 visa, which I've been working towards for a while. I'm happy to say I'm finally on it, which is really nice. I'm the co-founder and artistic director of a Shakespeare company called the Blind Cupid Shakespeare Company. The Blind Cupid Shakespeare Company, which is a Shakespeare company I actually created during the pandemic with the goal of actually allowing immigrant actors and actors whose their first language isn't necessarily English, can be, but isn't necessarily English, to give them the opportunity to do Shakespeare and classical works and things like that. I also run a Facebook group called React, which is where writers who are writing plays or screenplays can come and have actors from all over the world read their scripts and offer them feedback. and stuff, because I got really interested in new writing during the pandemic. Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
That's fabulous. So I think we should really dive right in. I'm taking notes as we go, a very professional host of a roundtable. And so sometimes you'll hear me clacking away at my keyboard, which is right here. And it just means that I'm excited about something. So I think really what I want to do, as I said, is I want to talk to you all, uncover a few of the differences between the way we do things, whether that be in Manila, France, Spain, the UK, Greece, Australia, and the way things are done here in the US in our experience. Of course, we obviously only have our own experiences to call on there as well. But really what I want to do is like figure out, what have we learned here? What did we bring here that people were sort of excited to find out? What do we wish that was here and at home? And so I think I'd love to dive right in and ask you, what's better about making theatre in the US than back home? Why are you here? Why did you come here to do it? Let's start again. Let's go around that same order. Ioanna, start us off.
So what I really love being here is, like, I believe that the theater in New York is more diverse, more inclusive, more open to foreign artists, and more open to artists from the LGBTQ community. And also, I found that there is more ethical codes here in the theater industry here in New York, because I come from Greece. Greece is a small country, only 10 million people. We didn't have immigrant population till recently. The last 20-25 years, we have some immigrants coming, more immigrant coming in Greece. So unfortunately, this immigrant population that we have the last 20 years, 25 years, haven't been assimilated in the Greek community, and they don't have a representation, unfortunately, in the arts in Greece. So coming from Greece, for me, was shock, seeing so different people from different countries. So I found it fascinating. And that's why I'm here. I like doing theater here. I feel more free, more open. Of course, there are many negative things. We're going to discuss about that, in the New York reality. But that was the main reason why I'm here.
So, like you're talking about, like, that greater sense of diversity that we have here in New York, and that the sort of the industry being more open to different types of people from different places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I came from Greece, as I said, which is a small country, and also, unfortunately, the art industry in Greece is very corrupted. Very corrupted.
Explain that. What do you mean by corrupt? Is it like there's a small group of people who are the ones who do everything?
Exactly. It's like a ghetto when I was in the drama school, and I was in a very good drama school in the National Theatre in Northern Greece. It's very difficult to enter in the school. It's very competitive. Very even from that moment, I was a kind of victim of harassment, of many things that I don't want to forget. But I felt that, it's, I don't know how I'm going to survive in this art world. So Greece is very, yes. For example, auditions, they are fake auditions, they are frauds auditions. People, they have already chosen who they're going to take, they just do the auditions for, it's like, it was. Now, the last 2 years, I'm very happy to say that it started a Me Too movement in Greece. Some people go to jail. Some people that they were very famous, directors. The artistic director of the National Theatre is in jail now. Yeah,
I mean,
and they are.
this
Yeah.
feels like a forward, like a progressive movement in that
Yes,
way. Like it feels like progress to have people be accountable for their actions.
Exactly. But this happened the last 2 years. During the pandemic, people started to speak and to say things about it. And I'm really optimistic. I'm really happy that that happened because it was time. It was time.
I mean, it's well past
start
time,
talking.
truly.
Yeah.
It's something that should have been happening this whole time, happening for a long time previous to this. It's I think that, yeah, the pandemic did have that effect where I think in terms of like race stuff, in terms of gender stuff, in terms of sexual harassment stuff, a lot of stuff has sort of come to the fore. Plus, you know, I know that there's similar things that have been going on in Australia. We've had stars in Australia who have people have come forward and spoken about them and their conduct. In a way that they were sort of emboldened by the global conversation, Harvey Weinstein, all of that sort of stuff, which is, you know, obviously so egregious and awful. And, you know, there's like maybe a lack of consequences for some cases of that sort of thing still, which is really disheartening. But I think that you're right that we are finally having those conversations, and that's a really important sort of step forward. It's... Yeah,
but
I think
the thing is that in Greece it was really very bad, the situation.
Right.
It was really bad. Yeah, I mean, here when I came here, I felt that I can, you know, go to audition and people will treat me, you know, fairly. They do auditions because they are real auditions. In Greece, really, you didn't know if you go to a real audition, if it's an audition, or it's just a fake audition. It was really very bad, the situation. I hope that things will change.
It sounds like, you know, I mean, you talked about being a cultural bridge. Sounds like you can bring some of that back to Greece, and that you can sort of introduce some of those practices here. I think that's the thing about smaller environments, right? Is that when you're in a smaller environment, the circle that's making theatre at like the commercial level or professional level, there might only be one or two circles. But here in New York, it feels like there might be circles that really mostly work with their friends or something, but there are so many circles that there's going to be opportunities for new people. And there are, I mean, the three of you here in this Zoom room are all people who are creating and taking advantage of new opportunities as well. And so there's more, it feels like there's more of that ground level entryway to sort of start doing things on your own, which means that we can, rather than trying to reform, I mean, to use your word, corrupt institutions, we could be creating new ones, which is exciting. Joe, in terms of in the UK, I don't know how much sort of your theatre experience was there versus your time in France and Spain, but that is another place that has sort of more circles, if that makes sense. And there's more of that like ground level entry, even through things like the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, all of that kind of stuff. There's more of that sort of ground level thing. How do you feel like that influences? Is that something that you feel like is a positive, good thing? Where do you come in?
Well, you know, I'm really happy, Andrew, that you said at the beginning that we're not representatives of our country, because you know, Britain, England is obviously a huge industry over there. There's a huge industry. And, it's a question I get asked all the time, like, why the hell would you want to come to America when you are English? And the truth is, for me, it's a matter of personal taste, if I'm completely honest. I did not grow up in England, even though I'm English and my whole family's English, and I went to drama school in England and in New York and everything. And I think that the theatre over there and the theatre scene is incredible. It's got a lot of problems, like everywhere does, just like here, that desperately need to be addressed.
What problems?
Well,
the
government, for example, we got a conservative government in there, and I don't want to get political or anything, but it's widely...
Well, I mean, we can say traditionally conservative governments give less to the arts in terms of support, right?
Sure, and I mean, you know, there is support for the arts. You can get art council grounding and stuff, grants, art council grants and stuff like that in England. But in terms of things like mental health and things like that, there needs to be a bigger discussion on mental health in England, in my opinion, anyway. Especially when it comes to, you know, artists and actors who are struggling out there, who, you know, may not.
Do you feel like that's a conversation that is being had here in New York?
If I'm honest, I'm not sure. That is something I'm not sure about in New York. That is just something I'm aware of in England. If I'm honest.
No, of course.
Another thing that sort of attracts me to New York a bit more than England. First off, like we said, America is a big industry. It's a bigger country for me as well. I really enjoy the fact that I can go to an audition and 3 days later be in like Maryland or Texas and like be doing something cool over there, and they'll pay for your travel and pay for your accommodation. Whereas in England, it's like, where are you going? Oh, I'm going up north, and you know, that's like where the conversation sort of ends and stuff like that. There's also a bit of an elitism that I felt in England, and you know, I'm sure many people would disagree with me, but this is just my own experience. And I love that, you know, when I moved back to England and went to drama school there, I felt a little bit like an outsider because I grew up with different cultures and I have 2 other languages and 2 other school systems in my head that other people just don't understand about me and stuff like that. And what really struck me about coming to New York, again, this is my own opinion, but it seems like everyone here is almost an outsider. And so it's much easier to feel like you belong. And it's much easier to feel, at least for me anyway, it's much easier to feel encouraged and supported.
It's a little bit that, it's that sort of situation of like, the United States, in my experience, is a little bit like 50 countries in a trench coat pretending to be one country. And so if you come from California and you've moved to New York, there are cultural differences. If you've come from Maryland, if you've come from Texas, if you know, there's like enough of a sense of like, that even the Americans who've moved to New York find themselves, as you say, being sort of like newcomers or something like that to this scene. Exactly. Yeah, there's a sort of shared experience, even at a sort of smaller level, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, in terms of, I mean, people like Rattlestick and Team Theatre and the company that I've created myself, I don't see any companies like that in England. I don't see any company who are like for the immigrant actors either. And you know, we're now living in a post-Brexit England as well. And
well, more people are considered immigrants, I guess, in that situation.
Exactly. And,
needlessly, but anyway.
I would like to see England move in a direction where they're appreciating, you know, there's a class struggle in England. There's a class struggle of, you know, we need more working class actors involved, you know, and things like that. And that's totally legit. And I can't speak for them because I don't come from that background, but I come from an immigrant background. And
it's an interesting thing to sort of touch on class, in terms of like the gateway for people. I think if you like think of like the traditional gateway for an actor might be to think of it as a career that's something you can do, which usually means you might have come from somewhere more comfortable. And then to step into it means maybe you go to drama school, which might cost money. And then you have to be able to take the time to go to auditions instead of working. It is an industry that can be inaccessible in a lot of ways. And so it's like the more we can do, you know, even in terms of like childcare, you know, you might get a recall for an audition that is the next morning. And we, in our auditions for Skin, we had someone who was like, I don't know if I can come in. I'm not sure if I can organize childcare. Luckily, I'm equipped to take care of children. I've done some early childhood education. So I said, yeah, I'll just, you know, I can spend 45 minutes with the kid. Please come and do a recall. We're asking a favor of you at this point. But it is that kind of thing that seems so easy at the local level that is missing from that like larger sort of conversation, isn't it? In terms of accessibility to theatre.
Yeah, and you know, you just reminded me of the drama school system in England. I auditioned for like 4 or 5 years in England for drama schools.
Wow.
And there's a lot of them in England, especially in London. There's a lot of them. And the most I ever had to pay for an audition, because you have to pay for every audition you do.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I agree. But the most I ever had to pay was £80 for an audition in London.
Did 80?
80 £80, which in US dollars is more akin to like $100.
That's so awful.
And that's like, you know, to go in for like 30 minutes, do a monologue that, you know, you've been told by your high school is a good monologue for drama school, and then just not get through a round. Like, it's, you know.
What a racket.
Yeah, and I understand why they charge, because, you know, it's on the panelists' time as well. They need to get paid, but it's not.
Yeah, but surely that's included in school fees, right?
It's not a fair system. It's not a fair system.
Yeah. Agreed. Russell, I'd love to hear you chime in. What is something that you're super excited about in theatre in New York that you feel like is maybe missing in Manila, or something that you're really excited about in Manila that you would love to see in New York?
Oh, that's a lot. Well, first,
It's a huge question.
Yeah, the thing that attracted me most, going back to the question earlier, sorry,
Please,
about
please.
New York is the diversity. Coming from Manila, most of us Asians, and then the main difference would be, since we're most Asians, when we have like visiting actors or actors that are of more they have Western features, it's more likely that they get cast in like these roles, and it's like, what is that the term, like systemic or something?
Yeah,
But
systemic, absolutely.
it's been something ingrained in the psyche, and of course it's a slow process to move away into that, and it only takes time and some really big movements from not legislation, but some unions and some organizations to change the way. And one of the things that I admire about like let's say New York City or the unions in this country is that they really, or there are systems in place to enforce like diversity or something in casting, or even work for like backstage and stuff like that. They're unionized, so it protects theater makers. Right now, the scene in Manila, it's in infancy, I should say. It's very young. It's only like 60, 70 years old from the vaudeville that the Americans brought during that era of like the post World War II. So it's pretty young, the entertainment industry. So so that's one thing that really attracted me the most, is the diversity and the capacity to have systems in place to protect and to support these different theater makers.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's interesting to speak about union stuff, because that really is one of the big differences between here and other places, I think. For me, at least, that's been my experience, is that in Australia, we certainly have equity. We have an actors union, and we have MEAA, which is the Media Entertainment Arts Alliance, which is our backstage workers. Even our ushers are covered by that same union. Membership in Australia is much easier. You say, I want to be a member, and they say, yes, please. You don't have to have done a contract in there's no like a quality assurance nonsense that is sort of exclusive. I'm sorry, I'm a very opinionated person, and so we'll just say what I think. And if you would disagree, please disagree. But it does mean that there were some protections about making sure that making sure producers couldn't just wholesale lift a cast from the US and put them in Australia and have a long run. There were some protections about that have since lapsed. And so we're seeing that take place again. And I think that it's a sort of a failure of collective action that we haven't done something to prevent that a little bit. But I think that what you're saying, a little bit of that idea of like people with Western features getting cast over or whatever, there's this sense in Australia, this sort of slightly parochial, I think is the word, maybe I'm wrong, sense that like we're not as good for some reason, or that if someone has been successful elsewhere, they are better for some reason. But in my experience, Australian actors are amongst the best in the world. The Australian writers, Australian directors, all very, and I think that this is true of all other places, like at international festivals, watching things from all over the world, I'm like, well, that's incredible. There's no sense that any one place is better. It's just that some places might have more opportunities for people to grow. But it's interesting to hear you talk about that idea of some people being preferenced in terms of roles, which is, I mean, obviously it's a distasteful idea at its core. But it's something that I think that we share in Australia, is that there's this sense of like, oh, but Australians, we can't possibly be as good. Oh gosh. And yeah, I don't know. I see Joe making a face. Do you feel like that's a little different for you?
Hey, you guys have Hugh Jackman, okay? You should be proud of Hugh Jackman alone.
It's very true. I mean, we have,
and Kate Blanchett. I love
truly
her.
Incredible. She's truly incredible, world class. And this is my thing, is that
Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger.
May he rest. It was that
and Jeffrey Ross. Jeffrey Ross. I
Yes, sadly, Jeffrey is at the core of one of these investigations that we talked about earlier, Ioanna.
Okay, I did.
A very talented actor, but perhaps not the best person. Wow. Perhaps, allegedly.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, maybe.
And so to sort of speak about this, the union is a little different. Something that I've noticed, though, that's interesting about it is that it can create a little difficulty at the ground level if you're a writer or a director trying to get a project off the ground, because there are ways that we do it in Australia where we can sort of say, like, okay, everyone, like, we know how this is. This is not enough money, but we're going to just split the profit. We're going to decide this is something that we think this is worthwhile doing. Let's go. But if you're a union member in the US, you don't have the opportunity to decide to do less, which is, I think, a very positive thing on a collective action level and on making sure that the industry treats people correctly. But it seems sort of sad in terms of like the fringe level theatre, that people get to a level in the fringe level theatre and in that small stuff off Broadway, I suppose here would be the equivalent. And then once they get good enough, they jump into this new category and they can't dip back in. Whereas in Australia, it feels like you have a lot of freedom of movement between these things. You can do something really small, even if you're really big. You can do something really big, even if you're really small. And so I sort of notice there's a bit more freedom of movement. Do any of you have any feelings on that?
I mean, we have equity in England as well. I wouldn't say it's as it's as essential in England. In England, we have something called Spotlight, and if you're not on Spotlight in England, you're basically not an actor. And like agents and casting people won't even look at you most of the time. So Spotlight is sort of taken more seriously a bit. Equity is still there. I will say I am currently casting something right now, a project that I'm doing here in New York, and there are a couple of actors who I really would have loved for the part, but the fact that they're not that they are equity has immediately ended that conversation. And I don't know. I understand the reasons, but it is sort of frustrating from that standpoint for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a thing that just like, it makes it a little more difficult for, it's wonderful for actors. It's really important, but it does make it more difficult getting started as a theatre maker from that rather than an interpretive artist, like as a writer, as a creator. It can be a little bit harder to like bring in people. We're super grateful, of course, at Rattlestick. They're an equity venue, and so we've been able to hire a couple of equity actors in our cast, but 4 of our cast aren't equity, and it's a cast of 6, and they're stunningly talented. But it did mean that we could cast the widest possible net, which is not something that we can do in every situation. Let's move on from the union for now. In terms of the cultural differences, something that I noticed here in the US, and this was some years ago when I dropped by, I went and saw an improv show. I'm in musical theatre primarily, I guess, which doesn't mean that, which, you know, please frown upon me, so you should. Many musicals are very bad. But and many are the best thing that I've ever seen. But just for me. And so something that I noticed was, like, I went to this show and a person did a gig they hosted a night of comedy, essentially, like an improv show. And they did a bit where they came out and they said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am a renowned Broadway composer and lyricist, Stephen Sondheim," which of course they weren't. It was very, you know, and it was obvious they're a young man. And he said, you know, "But I don't want to talk about the musicals. I want to talk about my line of saltwater taffy." He said, it can be, when you first taste it, you're not going to like it, but the longer you chew, the more it grows on you. And it was this joke that the whole audience understood was about Sondheim's work, understood was about it, and it just was a thing that would have fallen flat in literally any house in Australia unless you were just in front of theatre people. But this was an audience of the general public, and they had an understanding of who Stephen Sondheim was. They had an understanding of the complexity of his musicals, to the point that they could see that mapped over a joke about saltwater taffy and laugh at it and thought it was hilarious. And I sat in that audience and went, wow, okay, so New York has theatre literacy at a level that we just don't have in Australia. Would that also be true where you've grown up, where you've spent time in your theatre making worlds? Let's hear from Ioanna. Ooh, the mute button, we found it. Oh no, we lost it again.
Hi. So what is the question? Can you repeat it again?
I will. I will.
It's shorter.
Yes, thank you. And so I have experienced that the theatre literacy of the general public here in the US, or at least particularly in New York, I can't speak for the US at large, I suppose, but is greater than it is in Australia. I think Australia maybe culturally sees theatre as something that's a bit snooty and a bit like, they maybe turn their nose up at it a bit culturally. But with Greece, of course, a lot of the heart of the Western tradition of theatre started in Greece, right? With the Greek plays.
I can tell you something. Athens has the world record in theatre productions per year.
Okay.
Yeah, before COVID, of course, they had 1,600 productions in Athens.
In a year?
In a year, 5 million people. So in Greece, everybody's doing theater and almost everybody's watching. So it's like, which is, I find it interesting. Of course, there are many positive things there, but also you can find negative things too, because sometimes it's so many productions, most of them are not high quality, they're amateur actors. Almost everybody's doing theater or wants to do theater in Greece.
That's really, it's a big difference between Australia, where it seems to be much more niche. Although I will say the live performance figures are very high.
I mean, the university, we have many theater clubs. Every municipal has theater workshops and theater clubs. Everybody's doing theater. I mean, I started it because I watched my teacher being in the teacher's theater club. So it's like a cultural thing. We do theater. We like doing. Maybe it's a way of communicating because we have Mediterranean, this Mediterranean spirit. You want to communicate, to find a place that you will find others and create relationships. So I find it very interesting, this phenomenal that happens in Greece.
That actually speaks to something that's really interesting too, because I would say, broadly speaking, in Australia we are less expressive than my family on one side are Mediterranean, they're all Italians, and they're very expressive with their voices, with their hands, their whole bodies are really thrown into expression. I mean, it's a stereotype, but there's some truth in that. It's particularly in my family. My last name Strano means weird, and if you met my family, you would agree. And dearly do I love them. But it is that there is a sense of that like greater level of communicativeness culturally that in Australia, when you have like the sort of the colonizer population of Australia, or the descendants of that sort of, there's this kind of flatter, more reserved, less emotionally literate, again stereotypically, thing culturally. So it's really interesting to hear that.
And we have many festivals, especially during the summer. We have this very big open theaters. Some of them are Roman or ancient Greek theaters, and we use them. And it's a kind of, summer, you're gonna have a beer, and you're gonna go and watch a theater in the open, under the sky with the stars. So, and you're gonna watch maybe Antigone, maybe, the Trojan Women, maybe,
just something light,
so something it's like light. Something relaxed, or a comedy by Aristophanes, so it's a kind of part of our culture, which I'm very lucky. I can say that I'm really lucky because I watching from very early age these classical texts. It's like really a very rich heritage. I'm very lucky to say, and my love for poetry becomes, or poetic language or classical text comes from that. Or also it's in school we study Homer, we study these texts. It's a kind of a very rich heritage, and that also makes you I want to see Antigone. I read it in school. I want to go and see it on stage.
Right.
It's like, so that's.
I love that, Russell. Russell, I'd love to hear from you. You said that the theatre scene in Manila, at least in a Western sense, is younger. You said it was sort of like the idea of like vaudeville stuff coming over and hitting post World War II. I'm really interested to hear like how your experience of Filipino culture sort of speaks to the way you make theater, and the way you make theater speaks to Filipino culture, if that makes sense.
Of course, yeah. A bit of history. Yeah, when the Americans helped during post World War II, of course, the Americans brought in the Philippines like education system, entertainment, commerce, and stuff like that, which we're very grateful for. Of course, that's why most Filipinos are very literate. Like they can speak English well, even the ones that only finished high school or whatever. So from that alone, our exposure is mainly from like Western culture style of like Broadway stuff, and yeah, during the 50s, 60s, vaudeville was pretty big, so it evolved from that. And fast forward in the recent 5 years, especially during the time when there are more touring companies of like Phantom, Wicked, or these big Broadway musicals, of course, there's like a cost and benefit to it. While it is nice that our theater scene or the audiences, the audience development are getting more exposure to these Broadway shows, which is good because it attracts more people, and other areas of demographics are also exposed to what is the level of like what's out there for those especially who can't travel outside the country. So they're beginning to understand more. And then of course in the same token, the local theater community of course has to carry some of the weight of like, okay, how can we develop our own audiences? So of course it would take time, but it's that cultural difference is, while it's creating a gap, it's also bridging some, it's evolving into like a new way of communicating theater in the way that Filipinos are trying to find a way, okay, how can we get something from this and make it more Filipino and transfer it into our own productions? It would take time, but in the recent years, especially during the boom of the digital and social media stuff, people are more exposed into different forms of theater, not only Western, but also European and style. And the students that came in 10 years ago that went out are now coming back, and the years after that. So there's an influx of going out, but then it's doubling back when they return to the Philippines. So while there is a huge cultural difference, there is some, what is that, amalgamation or mix that's happening, that's evolving this infant industry into something that's mixing tradition of Filipino or Asian into a different style. So
it sounds like it's a really dynamic space that's like could go in a number of directions. Sounds like there's it sounds like it's really interesting.
It is, because again, it is pretty young. It's finding its feet. It's learning to stand. And again, these theater professors that we have are coming back with their 20 years of learning or taking stuff from different schools of theater in New York, in Europe, in Japan, in Germany. So they're bringing it all in. And there's cultural, big, huge difference, but then it's also the same thing that's making it grow and finding itself. So I don't know if that's really
No, it absolutely does. It's really fascinating. I think it speaks to a few things. One thing is that like in Australia, we do a lot of like remounts of existing productions. You know, we do the version of Wicked that you see here in New York. It's remounted in Australia. They remake it. And it means that a lot of our actors are really good at standing where Norbert Leo Butz stood in the original production of Wicked, or they're really good at standing where and reverse engineering what someone's intention was as they cross the stage, because they're just told, and then you cross the stage at this point, rather than being able to build it from the ground up. But in our theater scene, outside of our musical theater scene, in our fringe scene, we've got a lot of actors who are like creating new work, who are writing and performing, who are like more in that sort of hands-on space. And I'm really interested by the way that like in the way that affects development in Australia. We don't develop new musicals in the same way they do here in New York. We don't give them the same chance. because I guess potentially we're used to seeing musicals that have been in development for 5 years with some of the best musical theatre creators in the world. And so there's that sense of, and it plays in at that sort of parochial thing again. It's like, oh, if it was made here, could it possibly be good? And it's, of course it could. We just need to give it a chance and create these new development opportunities, which is something that I think that New York has a lot of, is that there's lots of different, whether that be the O'Neill or whether that be at various universities or whether that be like things that Rattlestick are doing here, there seems to be more spaces for you to be like, here's a piece. Do you like it? Maybe you can workshop it. Maybe we can go from here, which doesn't mean that everyone's going to get one all the time, but it feels like there's a bit more of that. A question I did have about the Filipino theatre scene as well is like, excuse my ignorance, but is there like a traditional Filipino theatre scene that existed previous to and therefore alongside Western influence? Like,
yes, somewhat. Most of our traditional plays stem from the Catholic traditions of like the cenaculo, the different Catholic rituals that are turned into plays brought by the Spanish rule.
Right.
We were under Spanish rule for like 3 centuries. So, so most of our theater traditions came from that, because they introduced theater live performance into the Philippines. Right. Of course, prior to that, we had different rituals as well. But then when the Spanish came, it really overhauled whatever live performance we had into something more ritualistic and more Catholic in tradition. So there's like the Passion of the Christ, all that fun stuff. And then some usual Filipino myths and folk tales.
Yes, that's very exciting. Something that I'd like to talk about, and I'd love us all to speak to this, the differences between in the rehearsal room. Something that, I mean, I think that this is really can really be like project to project, right? And it can be about who the director is, or if there's a director, or if people are choosing to make it in a way that's more of a flat structure hierarchically, or if we have like a stronger hierarchy. Something that I've heard is that there are countries in the world where the hierarchy is very strong. Someone spoke about working in, and that can depend on your discipline, but someone was talking to me about working in opera in Germany, and they said the hierarchy is very strong. The director says must go. Whereas, I've always seen great results from rooms where it doesn't matter where the idea comes from. It matters that we get a good idea. And I wondered what were your experiences with things like hierarchy in the rehearsal room, whether there were benefits to that or not, differences in developing new work in the rehearsal room, if there were sort of like cultural differences in that, or if there's a culture of like developing a thing once and then continuing to develop it, and whether you bring people with you. This is a broad net that I'm casting, but if any of that has sparked your interest, gosh, I'd love to hear about it. Yes, Joe, please.
Okay. Well, no, it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say that in the rehearsal room, England and America are completely like extremely different in that sense. I think, we both value professionalism. We both value, get there on time, be professional, leave your rubbish outside the room, and then, we'll get to work, and then we can have all that afterwards. But, I recently auditioned I recently directed a play in London at the Etc. Theatre in Camden. And this was really interesting to me because I was bringing in a lot of stuff that I'd learned from directors in America into this rehearsal room in England. And I was working with 2 actors who were old school. They were both like in their 60s, and they were, different generations to me. And it was kind of fascinating to me because as the director, I wanted to be very, collaborative. I wanted to know what the actors thought. I wanted to know how they were feeling and stuff. And I remember at one point I said, I watched the scene and I said, okay, how did that feel? And the guy was just like, well, it doesn't matter how it felt. How did it look? What did you think? You're the director. And I was like, whoa, man, like, come on. Like, I just want to know how you feel. How did it feel good? Did it feel bad? Like, and he really struggled with the idea of like, he actually had a say. And that to me was really interesting. So yeah, I'm sure he's probably been in other rehearsal rooms where that wasn't the case, and I'm sure many other people in America have as well. But yeah, that's my 2 cents there.
I think that's really interesting, and that sense of a more collaborative process, and that we seem to be moving in that direction, broadly speaking, I think is really lovely. It's that idea, and I mean, this is a lot of I've done a lot of the second worst form of theatre, improvisation, in my life, and I think that, like, in improv, it truly has to be collaborative because you're making it together on the spot in the moment, and so you have to be listening to everyone. Everyone's idea must be valid because it already happened, so we have to make it work. And I like to bring a lot of that into the way I work, in the idea that I when I'm a director, I want people to throw ideas out into the space. When I'm not a director, I love to throw my ideas out, and I'm really happy to be told no. And I think that's that idea of, like, depersonalizing this and being like, we're trying to make a better product. And therefore, it's not about whether your idea or my idea. It's about which idea better. You know, that's something that I'm interested in. Ioanna, you seem sparked by some of the. Oh, sorry, no, but Joe, please finish your thought.
I was just going to add, you know, if it looks good to the director, but the actor doesn't feel good about that, I wanted to know, and he, you know, both of them really seem to be baffled by that idea. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's, and I mean, generationally, that feels, again, broadly speaking, true to the sort of tone, I think, a little bit of the way that things have worked. Ioanna, you seemed like you lit up a little bit of talking about this. I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, I mean, it depends definitely from the director. And from my experience in Greece, I have seen some directors that they were even violent. I mean, even they were throwing scripts,
absolutely not.
you know, like that. Yeah, it happened. You know, I had a choreographer that he was like that. You know, very. I mean, it happens. It depends the case. I believe that now, with all that we talked about, the changes that are happening in the industry, thankfully now they are. I believe that they, even in Greece, they think about their behavior before they act. The theater that I do is very, I mean, I don't consider myself, I say I am a director, but I don't consider myself as a director when I direct. I'm more like an actor that coordinates a rehearsal. So because maybe I'm an actor too, I have that feel always. And I work with ensembles. I mean, I had an ensemble in Greece for 15 years. We worked a lot with improvisation, with you know, discussion. It was very open, the rehearsal process. So for me, seeing some directors behaving like that, it was like a nightmare. And I can't believe that still they are still directors that they behave like that. That they are like, no, they tell you, you're gonna stand here and you're gonna, and like, you know, just telling you exactly like you are, like they are behaving, you know, like the actor is just a doll, that they are just playing with a doll. It's like I hate that kind of theater. I don't like that kind of theater. And in Greece, we had a kind of that theater. Not all the directors, of course, but there were some of the directors, they were, you know, treating the actors like that, like they were dolls.
I think the thing that really upsets me about it is the way that it shuts down creativity, and it shuts down potential, and it shuts down options. And it makes it can really put you only inside yourself instead of feeling expansive and a part of a greater.
Yeah. I mean, there are some genius directors. I think I watched a documentary about Bob Wilson, which is he's showing you even how exactly the movement will be. You know, because he's very visual. He almost like you do a choreography. So I understand, but there are some, you know, it's very specific, the theater that he's doing, the style that he's doing, and more like a choreography. So I can understand. It's not my thing. It's not my, but you know.
There is a difference between. Sorry, just jumping in with that. I think
Please, no, I want that.
I think there is a difference between having an artistic style that is your style and your signature when it comes to theater, and having an ego.
That's true.
If you don't do it my way, then it's not the right way. And I think that that is
Exactly.
probably the difference between.
It
Yeah.
comes down a little bit to the nature of consent, right? If you know that director, you know his style. I imagine in his auditions he makes it really clear the way that he works, and he invites you to be a part of that process. And if you want to sign up, great. Versus when you sign up thinking it's going to be a collaborative thing and people are telling you what to do and moving you play. It's that idea of like, if you sign up for it and you're comfortable with it, great. Like these actors that you talked about earlier, Joe, might be totally fine with that. And that might be a really productive workplace environment for them. But yeah, it comes down to that idea of being able to sign up to it knowingly and willingly. Russell, did you have anything to add to this conversation before we move on to one last thing I want to discuss before we get through?
No, I agree pretty much with everyone. There are certain times, or like what Joe said, it's gonna be ego. If it's not a matter of, it could be stylistic. Maybe they were at that moment trying to recreate something, or maybe something cinematic or something abstract that needs a certain degree of specific direction. But pretty much I think not that it happens universally, but there is a time where directors were like that. So I'm glad that in the recent years, this word of like collaborative nature is coming along, and it's organically moving around the other industries as well. So
yes, yeah, I think it's like a conversation that isn't isolated to the theatre. People are looking for better management styles all over. There's there's that book that they wrote, the guy who ran Pixar for a while wrote about that sort of thing. There's all people who are looking for that all over, which I think is always a positive thing to be looking to improve, not only in the quality of the theatre we make, but in the quality of the way we make the theatre, in terms of looking for improvements in both of those. There's two things I'd like to touch on before we finish. One is something that we've touched on a little bit, and that I think that this discussion we're having leads into very smoothly, which is the growing conversation around mental health in the theatre and how we can better care for people. Obviously, we're not going to get through that in 8 minutes. We couldn't get through it in 8 days. But I'd love to hear some thoughts on your experience with that here at home, as it grows, things that have been big touchstones for you. And then before we finish, the last thing I'd like to talk about before we finish is, if you could right now, right here, pick something that you'd like to change about the way that we make theatre on a broader scale, like what would that be? What would you like to see? And is that something that you've taken from here, something that you've brought from home, something that's just part of your own practice? So let's talk about this. So in terms of mental health in the theatre, what I want to know is, for you, how do you think that we can better care for theatre professionals? Like, what's something that's maybe part of your practice as a director, part of your practice as an actor that you appreciate or love when you get it in rooms? Let's hear. Let's start with Russell.
It's a new thing. There's a lot of new things, changes that are happening in the Philippines, especially like it's recent, very recent for me, like intimacy director, stuff like that. This is something new for the Philippines as well. And especially talks of mental health. We're still we're still moving into like inclusivity, even though we're all Asians, or in the Philippines, we do have some like differences still. So we're still into that transition mode, and even the talk of mental health is a big thing. It's a lot to unwrap. One thing would be, if I can change something, would be support groups for old theater practitioners, because of course the older they get, their generation is thinning, so maybe their support group is lessening and lessening, because their generations and their friends and their circle are, and so they lose touch, and then eventually you just hear them after 5 or 10 years, so something I would want to see, hopefully, because here you have some support groups or some organizations that deal with that, or just stay in touch and keeping that, not just in the theater, but as like a systems in place. So hopefully we get to have those things in Manila, where there are like support groups people can reach out to. Thank you.
I love that idea. I think that's very important. And it's something that I've noticed too, like when I write pieces, that there isn't a musical that I've written that doesn't really span ages to at least people in their mid-50s. And most of the things I write tend to have kids who are 11 and people who are in their 80s or whatever. And so we just did a presentation of a show that I've been workshopping in Australia, where we had someone who is he's firmly in his 70s. And talking with him about all of this stuff was not only does he have a wealth of this theatre making knowledge, and was he a complete asset in the room, but also he has stories about like being one of his friends around still doing it, even if that's not because everyone has passed away, but because people are just not feeling physically up to it anymore, or all of that sort of a thing. So that's very interesting and I think that's super valid. Let's speak with Ioanna. What would you change? Well, what do you think is important, or what have you noticed about mental health in work?
So,
or what do you love?
I mean, I was a witness of situation in a theater production where the actor collapsed on stage because of dealing with mental issues, and we had to stop in Greece. That happened some years ago in Greece. So, and I had friend actors that they were dealing with mental issues. This is a big problem, and it's not only the mental issues. I mean, the healthcare. Most of the actors, they don't have money for health insurance. Okay.
God, we didn't even get into that.
This is a very big, discussion. It's not only about the mental illness, but healthcare generally. Okay, so what I wanted to change, now I'm coming to that, because it's that I believe that in New York, we need more money, grants for new work and experimental work. Because I see the difference. I mean, I said some bad things about Greece, but there are some good things too. Even we are a small country. For many years, the cultural ministry, the Hellenic Cultural Ministry, gives grants to professionals, to groups. And if I compare the money that I get from the city of New York to do a project, I would say that it's nothing compared to the money that the Hellenic Ministry of Greece, which is a small and poorer country than US, is giving to the arts.
Yeah,
so,
it seems to be that there's a lot more private giving and a lot less public.
Exactly, and but the private money doesn't go to the small companies.
Right.
They go to the to the big
Lincoln Center, et cetera,
exactly, BAM, to that prestigious organizations. So I believe that the city should give more. They have money. We live in the richest city in the world, and the subway sucks, and we don't have arts enough. Yeah,
I mean, I'd love to see that. I will have to cut you short, Ioanna, because I want to hear from Joe before we start. I will just say quickly, if any of the stuff that we talked about today has touched a nerve for you, NYC WELL is a wonderful resource. Look them up online. They've got text or call or chat services if you've got problems like stress, depression, anxiety, etc. Joe, I would love to hear from you. We really will be cut off in less than 2 minutes.
Well, for that reason, I will be incredibly short. Less than 2 minutes. I mean, for me, in terms of mental health, I would like to see more discussion about it. Because when you asked me what the situation was in New York, I could very honestly say I don't know, and I would like to know. So I would like more discussion on it, and to know what the situation is, especially because for fear of sounding arrogant, I'm not sure. I would not categorize myself as someone with mental health issues. And so I would never claim to know what is needed. And so I would like to, have that conversation and opportunities for that conversation. And that's where I'll end that, because we're
perfect. No, absolutely. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Ioanna. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Russell. This is really a wonderful conversation. Gosh, I can't wait to continue it. I'm sure in person at some point. The work that you sound like you are doing is fabulous. I think you should get along and see these wonderful artists do their thing. Thank you for tuning in. And that's been us, I think. At this point, we can get cut off at any point. So
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank
It's
you.
been a total pleasure.